kind of like creating your own personal place that you can store your own threat intel. And to do this, like if you're in a big corporation, in order to do something like this, there's tons of red tape. If you, I mean, you could do this using things like SharePoints or wikis. You could do the exact same thing, or there's other open source Splunk type solutions that are out there. But the problem is there's this, you have to deal with all the politics, the funding, the server setup, and especially like I'm in a huge organization, and to set up like a simple SharePoint server would be like a year-long project. And so there's no way that I was going to get funding to do that. But I wanted something that I could reference so that I have sort of a history of a lot of stuff going on. And as you'll see in the talk, I've been through a whole dashboarding process and trying to pull a lot of that information together into something, and I wanted it to be web-based so that I could access it at home, at work, and so I was really focusing on some of the different web apps that are out there. And so this is the story that I'm going to tell, is basically how I got there, what it looks like now, what the pros and cons are, and then finally creating a framework so that take the lessons learned that I've picked up here and using that as a framework so that you can easily apply it to something like a SharePoint or just any just any basic document repository. So here's my traditional disclaimer. These opinions are only my own, and they're not those of employers or customers or whatever. For those, this is me, my avatar, so you might see me on Twitter associated with that. So I've been in industry for about 20 years. The past 15 have focused exclusively in the information security realm. I'd say most of that time I was doing security engineering, security architecture type work, but the past 5 to 6 years I've shifted over into more of an operational environment. So I've been working either in a SOC or with SOCs to help them improve their processes. So just, security engineering, did some FISMA for all those that are from the DC area. BD, did some trade studies looking at different products and doing bake-offs. And like I said, working in a SOC, and as one of my roles there is really focusing on IT security training. For those that are familiar, I've been running this website probably like for the past 8 years, so this is the plug for that. So please check it out, and this is where like I'll post the slides or just opinions that I may or may not have. And I'm also starting up a little consulting business to do some stuff on the side. So if you like some of the stuff that you see here and you're interested in getting some opinions, please contact me. So getting to the point at hand, so I'm going to talk about the premise, kind of the historical, like where things started, how I got to where I am right now. Pivot. So in startups, a lot of times you'll start doing one thing and you'll realize that's not working, and so you'll pivot off into another direction. So this is my play on that. And then I'm going to talk about also what is threat intel. So talk about that, and then sort of merging all that together into how I'm using Evernote to do that. So one of the premises that I've seen is, especially in large corporations, is that we really tend to over-engineer stuff. I generally try to stay with the philosophy, like the KISS principle, keep it simple, stupid. I see that a lot of times there are solutions, like they're looking to solve a particular problem, and a lot of the solutions are these big, complex monstrosities that are going to take years to build. But there's a lot of quick solutions that could probably get you 60 to 70% of the way there. And so I like that because if by doing the simple solutions too, that can help you determine what your real needs are, what your real requirements are, so that you can identify where there are gaps. And when you do implement that huge project, you have a much better understanding of what the user needs are. So one of the examples here is I had a very senior level program manager that I worked with, and they were trying to put together an onboarding system. So whenever a new employee comes on, there's a process that they have to go through in terms of approval. And so we had some developers, and so they set up this complex thing on SharePoint. There were some other efforts to do it on Microsoft Access. But in the end, all these, the managers that needed to use this system didn't use it because it was too complex to use. So I left off and did some other projects, and about 6 months later, I came back, and the manager said, and I asked about this, how did you solve that? And she said, oh, I created a solution for it. And I'm thinking, because this is a very high level manager that usually sits in meetings all day, and I'm thinking you solve this? And then so she brings up SharePoint, and she basically shows me that she basically created a folder structure, which was, hey, there's an inbox, submitted, and approved. And so there was a Word document that they would fill out, and then this would track the whole workflow. So this is an example of a solution that gets them 60 to 70% of the way there. It does the job. And then this kind of talks what I mentioned on the previous slide about a lot of people, there's a big hack, a big breach, and so they'll go out and buy some new commercial product without really understanding what their problems are. And so what I like to do is try to build that quick and dirty solution first, because then you can figure out what your true needs are. And the outcomes are that is maybe this quick and dirty solution is the final solution, and you don't need this big complex process. But most likely there's going to be gaps, and understanding where your gaps are, and also through the quick and dirty process, seeing how users use it, that'll help you understand what your true requirements are, so that whenever you do partner with a product or some other solution, you'll understand what you really need, and you can pick the product that really meets your needs. And then this gets back into the process that so for those in the DoD realm, there's the people process technology. So you're trying to solve a problem, and the three components of that are people, process, and technology. And I think there's a reason why they put the theory of that model there. There's a reason that they put technology last, because you got to invest in the people first and use those people to create those processes. Because in a lot of cases, maybe with processes and smart folks, you can create that quick and dirty solution without ever having to purchase that product. So the example here, so this whole philosophy here, applying that philosophy to threat intel services. So this is, so I don't know, probably about 5-6 years ago, I was working in a SOC, and they wanted this dashboard, and no one had ever done anything like this, so they wanted to measure risk, and so I put some proposals together, and I decided that I would just use the traditional risk equation, broken down into vulnerabilities, impacts, and threats. For vulnerabilities, we had just simple things like patch data, stuff like that. Impact was kind of fuzzy because couldn't really, we had to leave that out because didn't really have that type of data available to us. and then the threat. So for threat, how can we determine what that is? And at least my quick and dirty solution was to look at some of the other threat meters that are out there and try to normalize them and then use that. And so you had this nice little dashboard where like the executive could look at it and they'd say, oh, this is what our risk is. And then you could click down and then you could see the data behind it. And so that was, basically for this whole, that is the foundation that started this whole process that I'm going through here. So I moved on and doing more analyst work, but I still wanted access to data like that because I like how I took the risk and I broke it down into threats and vulnerabilities, because as an analyst, that allowed me to focus what my attention was on. So, RIP Google Reader and iGoogle, but started out with that, and they had like with Google Reader, you could group feeds, and then you could turn those feeds into gadgets that you could put on your iGoogle page, and it was a nice solution for just essentially keeping up to date with what's going on. Eventually, I transitioned into Feedly when all the Google products went away. But I didn't like it as much because it was like I wanted a dashboard that I could just quickly look at it and things would just sort of pop out at me. So from Feedly, I started, and this is a product that you guys might want to try out, but it's NetVibes. And it's basically this online service for doing dashboarding. And there's commercial versions that, pretty expensive though. But for free, you can add your own feeds to it, and it could give you like a nice little dashboard. This is what my dashboard looks like now, essentially, that I have there. So like I said, I just had this Cyber Intel tab, and then I took a lot of the sources that I've been relying on and ported them to this. So the whole takeaways that I had with this experience was that this was nice for blog feeds. So whenever there were feeds where periodically, maybe a few times a day, stuff would come out, it worked well for stuff like that. But a lot of the feeds that I tried to add to it I called them data-driven feeds. So things like the list of IPs that are constantly being updated, those didn't work so well because a lot of times you would have like 100 IPs added to the feed, but the RSS feed would only be like, it would only hold like 20 items. So the cool thing is they did have a solution for this. There's for the paid versions of the Feedly and the NetVibes products, you could actually keep all that data, and you could search, but fairly expensive. And the other big thing is that it didn't work for files that were updated periodically, because usually you'll have sites, and then they'll have this big list, like this big blacklist of like IPs, domains, whatever, and that list is just updated periodically. And so there was really no way to get that sort of data into it. So this is where I pivoted, so hey, maybe this dashboard thing's not working. So meanwhile, the threat, like I said, this was probably, we're about maybe 3 years back, but the threat intel market has been growing. So I started looking at, what is this magic threat intel? This is like, reminds me of back in the day when everyone was saying cloud. And they're like, oh, and it's like, ooh, cloud, right? And then and I was like that. And then I started working with it, and I'm like, these are just VMs. On somebody else's server. It's not that complex. There's other models that they have there, but yeah, so the threat intel market was growing. So I've spent a lot of time talking to experts and people that are up on all these threat intel feeds that you can purchase. And so my basic takeaway from some of these interviews was that this whole threat intel, it just has this magic buzz to it, and it sounds cool. And they're doing some amazing things with it, where they're enriching the data. You're not just getting this IP, but there's maybe a priority or something associated with that. So they're doing like this really cool stuff that I don't understand with all this big data mashing. But what I found, though, is what a lot of people said was that, and this was actually said yesterday in Actionable Threat Intel talk, that people that attended that, was that it's really not much value beyond open source resources. One person that I talked to said that if you follow a good set of people on Twitter, there's basically not much value add to some of the different threat intel services that are out there. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't buy it, but this is, and this goes back to that example where, hey, let's set up something quick and dirty, see where our gaps are, and then that would help us choose the right threat intel to rely on. Because a lot of the threat intel services, they're giving you all the data, but is any of that data relevant? Like instead of being overwhelmed with IDS alerts, right? It's the same philosophy. Now I'm overwhelmed with like threat intel, like IPs or hosts or whatever. And this is what the quote where that picture came from. When your threat intel solution is feeling more like a threat intel problem. But I think overall, this was very close to what I was doing with some of the dashboard stuff. So at this point, I decided, well, what am I going to do here? So I basically put up a set of requirements of what I was looking for. So I definitely wanted it to be an online service, so something like NetVibes, but doesn't cost $1,000 per month. And essentially what I've learned is that you don't need anything complex. You just need a bucket. And it doesn't matter where the data comes from. Just dump it in the bucket, because you can search through it and filter for it after the fact. So, I talked about some of the blogs, and there's some other feeds that you could use to push stuff in. Being able to deal with the data-driven feeds. So whenever there's data that's coming in faster than would be useful to display on a dashboard. And also data files, being able to find those updated blacklists and look at it and say, hey, has anything changed? No? Do nothing. If it has changed, hey, give me a copy. But then the big thing is like, where can I put all this stuff where I can have access to it? And I can easily search through it and find stuff. Like I want it searchable, maybe having some sort of category system, and then also tagging. And I love tagging because tagging gives you, it's sort of like a table of contents, but depending on how you sort and view the tags, you can create multiple outlines of that same data. So definitely was looking for tagging feature. And like I said, I wanted it to be cloud-based so that I could access it at work, at home, because I run that website, and so it's nice, like I may be home and I might be able to look at some data associated with maybe people that are trying to attack me. So has anyone heard of the, so I asked about the secret weapon. Has anyone heard of that? I think like one person. So what this is, and so does anybody use getting things done or follow that basic philosophy in terms of their, all right. So what it is, the secret weapon, and I definitely go check out the site because it's really cool. And I love it, but it's basically using Evernote as your notepad or whatever in terms of getting things done. So essentially, what they're doing is treat Evernote as a big database. A notebook is kind of like a table, and a note is a free-form record. And in this case, the notes are your to-dos. And then they use notebooks to track whether, hey, this is something I'm actively working on, or if it's something I've done. So like I said, and if you look over on the screen, right-hand side there, the tasks, and then there's action pending and completed. So initially, all the things that you're working on get pushed into the actions pending, and as you do them, and you can take notes on your progress and stuff, and then whenever you're done with it, you just move it into completed. And then they have this really complex tagging hierarchy. So basically being able to give a note different tags representing the data that's in it. So they do kind of like a who, what, when, where. So that's basically a project. When is associated with importance, But in this case, as you can see on the right hand side, like 1, hey, this is something I'm going to focus on today, all the way up to 6 or 5, this is something that I'm going to do someday. And then a lot of times you'll do something and you'll send that email off, and now you're in this waiting state. So they have a priority 6, which is just waiting for something. And that's nice because every once in a while you can go to your waiting list and you can follow up with, oh, hey, they haven't gotten back to me yet. I'm going to go look for it. And the other thing is search, because this is Evernote. You can search by lots of different factors. So you can search by notebook, by tag, by keyword, or you can combine these in different ways to find just the data that you're looking for. And the nice thing too is with Evernote, you can create saved searches. So I can basically create a saved search that says, hey, show me all my action pending. Show me all the actions that I'm going to do now that are associated with work. So when I go to work, I just click this save search, and bam, cool, this is what I have to work on today. And I've also, in GTD philosophy, there's an inbox too. So whenever you come up with a new idea, you just type that task in or that idea in. And and you'll see in the top right, they also have a cabinet feature. So this is where you would put all your traditional Evernote stuff that's basically not actionable. So this is my cut, like GTD, the secret weapon is just, I'll call it a framework, and you can adapt it to meet your needs. So I basically changed it up so that, adding symbols and stuff like that, so that things would sort correctly. Let's see. So as you can see here, like with all the W, like the who, what, when, where, I basically added a symbol associated with that so that the order would always be in the same way. And then I also carried through the symbols associated with that into subtags, because theoretically, like, I could have communities, but they could be under multiple different subtags, so that you could have that same keyword in different places. And then the dot I use to indicate that it's a header versus like a tag that you would actually search on. And so basically that's a summary of what my current system looks like. So the next part of thing that I want to give a little bit of background on before all these concepts get pulled together is looking at what threat intel is. So in most cases, it boils down to indicators, and these are usually IPs, domains, URLs, hashes, stuff like that. So you can have this very, very basic data, but you can also have this very mature threat intel, which usually comes in the form of a report. So you're maybe focusing on like a specific threat actor, how they do, what their tradecraft is, and then and then adding those detections into your perimeter defense so that you can detect them doing stuff. But historically, there's lots of different open source resources, and I just list a few here, but there's tons of them, and there's tons of lists. Like in the presentation yesterday, he had this nice little, it was sort of a list of open source Intel lists. So there's lots of stuff out there. And there's a lot of people in the vendor area that are pulling all these things together. There's critical stacks, so anybody can sign up for this service, and it pulls in from like 95 feeds, and it does all the deduping and stuff. So there's a lot of places to get that. And then don't forget social networks too, because like the one person that I talked to, they said if you follow the right people on Twitter, usually that they would find out about threats on Twitter first before they would get it from their threat intel provider. So don't forget that too. So being able to find those right people that you want to follow. And then people have created, I guess, threat bots where they would put a bunch of honeypots out, and then like on Twitter, they will tweet like, hey, this IP is attacking me. So there's those types of resources too. And the other thing too is to mix in organizational specific data too. Because a lot of times you'll be getting a lot of, from open source or from a threat intel vendor, you'll be getting tons of different resources, but most of it's not relevant. So an easy way to, like you need to enrich this data with internal stuff too. So maybe set up some honeypots internally. There may be this box, and no one should theoretically be touching that box. But if somebody touches it, then hey, let's investigate that IP. So it's sort of a tripwire but I guess somebody trademarked that, so they couldn't use it. So commercial, and this gets back to the philosophy, hey, let's get the free stuff first and see what our true needs are. But the big need associated with open source is we need this big bucket to put everything into, right? So the next group, or the next category of threat intel are intel sharing groups. So there's a bunch of these. There's official ones like the different ISACs. If you're in the DoD realm, there's the DIB. There's organizations like InfraGard too. And then there's a lot of, I guess, secret ones that people that have worked together for years and years, they'll have their own little threat intel sharing lists or whatever. So once again, I talked to a bunch of people that are on these, and ironically, I really found out that these big fancy threat intel or intel sharing resources are usually just like a bulletin board, or maybe it's an email list that they belong to. So that's one of the reasons why you're seeing the big shift to standards like STIX and TAXI and Cybox, standard ways of sharing that intel. But still, some groups are getting better, but I'd say the majority of them are just using stuff that we were doing 20 years ago. But once again, we need this big one place to put all the data into. Like, what could that be? I don't know. So the other thing is case tracking. A lot of times, so you'll get an alert, and you'll want to investigate that. And the frontline analysts and even the second-tier folks, they'll look at it, but they're looking at this particular event in isolation. What you need people that are going to step back and look across all the incidents so that you can do trending. Because maybe it's the same attacker, but you can see different by looking at all the incidents associated with them. You can learn more about what their tradecraft is. But usually most of these systems is pretty easy. It's just a workflow system. So hey, I'm going to open up a new case. You work on it, then at some point it eventually gets closed, right? Pretty basic system. So there's many existing solutions that do that. There's free, there's super expensive. So there's a lot of things that you can do that with. But once again, the big need is this is yet another separate bucket of where a lot of useful data is stored. And so what you need is to pull all this stuff together so that it's in the one place. So looking at some of the other existing solutions that are out there, there's a lot of open source tools. There's, like I mentioned, Critical Stack. That's, it's supported by a vendor, but it's basically you install this client and then you can download all that data from the 95 different sites. And there's some nice tools out there like Crits and SIF that can automatically pull in feeds so that you have this data, at least within your organization, on one server so that you can search through it and use it for various reasons for doing things like hunting, but also pushing that data out to your sensors so that the sensors alert on certain things. So like I said, Intel sharing, I already talked about that with email lists and bulletin boards and going to standards like TAXI and STIX. In case management, there's some, touched on some of those. There's a solution that I learned about probably about 6 months back called Threat Connect. And it's sort of, they have a pretty good business model, I think, because they automatically pull in, like you can sign up for free. Like I can go and just join, and then they'll have different communities there, and you can just join them. But then they have sort of a value add on top of that most big companies would probably go with. But they actually pull in, I don't know, probably about from 10 different open source Intel sources. But you can do a lot of cool things with it. You can go in and create cases, and you can pivot. So there's solutions that are out there that are like it, that could solve this problem. But I think overall, one of the takeaways is that there are lots of point solutions that meet these three needs that I was talking about. But not everybody can use them. Like getting back to that one example with the onboarding workflow, right? I mean, like a senior level manager that has no technical skills or has long past those, they could do it. I could do it, versus your first year analyst could do it. And then also you need it to be centralized. So you need all this data from all these different resources pushed into one place so that you can look across it and look for those trends. And so that's where Evernote came in. So based on the requirements that I talked about and my love of Evernote and some of the lessons learned that I got with the secret weaping, the experiences that I had with dashboarding, and what I've learned about threat intel is basically pulling all this together so that you can have using Evernote as your Intel repo. So basically define what your notebooks are. So you can have a notebook for each of the different purposes that I talked about. I talked about three, the info sharing, the OSINT, and the case management, but you could create other ones too, like for like an indicator database, or you could create a notebook for adversaries. So hey, these are the where you could document and keep track of the different tradecraft associated with particular attackers. So it's open and flexible, and there's a lot of things that you can use to build off of it. And then two, with some of the different saved searches that are available to it makes it very easy to use. And I'll talk about that next. So getting back to the ease of use. And basically the solution here is to just start dumping all these feeds in. Grab these RSS feeds that I talked about, all these open source ones, and just start dumping them into Evernote, and you essentially have it. So this is talking about the open source Intel. Benefits is that you can use some of the different search capabilities to find like IPs, domains, and based on what you learned, on what you find, you can use that to pivot off to other notes and do other search as well. And I think one of the cool things too is that you can annotate notes. So, you know, if I get a note that's from an OSINT source, you know, maybe I can add a little, like maybe I've worked with it and I can add a little note to the end saying, you know, just put my name and date and be like, hey, this is kind of a useless piece. You know, I would disregard this, or hey, this is awesome. I used it in these cases, and you can link notes too. So you can link to different cases and stuff too. So the annotation is big. So dumping, you know, you have to come up with some automated method to get the feeds into Evernote. And then the other thing too is a lot of times, you know, the vendor comes out with some big APT report. Being able to just find stuff, you know, you read a blog, you know, being able to just have browser plugins where I could just click a button saying, hey, send this article to Evernote. So it's very easy to add stuff to it on the fly too. And then need to come up with a recommended tagging structure or framework so that you can make sense of all this data. So this is just a quick list of some of the kind of in my initial implementations. I basically pulled a bunch of data from these various feeds, so the RSS feeds. So and then the other thing too is I wanted to just put some normal blogs in there too, because maybe I'll be searching for something and this will take me back to something, to a piece of intel that happened 3 months back, right? So now I can be like, all right, well, it was around this time. What was going on, right? So you can know what the bloggers were writing about, what was in the news, and so you can use that to relate to things as well. So this is an example of just the OSINT sources and what it sort of looks like. I basically have this OSINT database, or this one notebook that all the stuff is pushed into. I have a tagging structure defined by the bracket. Does everybody remember what I used the bracket for? Nothing? No? Okay, so the brackets were like projects, essentially. So, but I was basically using that as you can tell, the what. So this is, you know, well, what is this piece of data? Is it a blog? Is it a domain list? Is it from exploit DB? And then you got the who associated with that too on the right-hand side. So you can, you know, look at something like at @abuse.ch, and there's like 2 things there that are associated with that. So you can really get down to the different feeds, like if you have multiple feeds from a single resource. So the next question is, well, how do I automate this? Well, I haven't coded in years. So I was trying to figure out how I could do this. There's a lot of services that you could sign up for, give them an email, and with Evernote, you get your own secret email, and anything that is sent to that email address gets put into Evernote as a note. And you can, depending on how you structure tags in the subject line, you can control what notebook and what tags are added to that note. So there's services like if this, then that, and there's a competing service that's a little newer, a little bit more flexible, called Zapier. So you can use that to basically suck in feeds, and then whenever a new item is added to that feed, it creates this new node in Evernote. Because this is an RSS feed, you are limited somewhat, because most people in their RSS feeds don't give you the whole article or all the data. So you do have a limit there that you're only going to get partial data. So the solutions there is you could write your own RSS scraper. But there's this product that I found that's like $25, and you throw it up on a server called 5Filter, and you give it an RSS feed, and it'll go and turn that partial content into the full content. So that's a good way to get all the data associated with that data item. You can do it, these same tools, if this then that, you can do it with email. So hey, whenever I get an email in my inbox from this user, create a note for that. So if you subscribe to different services that provide you data. I haven't played with it, but this Storm Stack, so there's a commercial company behind it too, but there's an open source solution. So it's basically like if then, or if this then that, except you can set it up on your own server, and it's a little bit more powerful, and you have some more capabilities. It's probably a little bit more complex to set up too. And then the last thing too is scripts. I was talking about some of those blacklists that I would want to download, but I only want to add them to Evernote if things have changed. So I have a beta script. It's just a bash script that I put together to go to some of these different sites and basically put on that file, look if they're, and then hash that, look if it changed from the previous hash, and if it didn't change, then I do nothing with it. But if the hash is different, then it takes that file and emails it off to Evernote. And then the other thing too is, so SIF, that particular tool has a lot of open source feeds that are built into it. So this is already pre-programmed to pull in all of that data. The nice thing about that is you can have one feed coming out of it so that you turn all that data into one feed. And then I can use something like if this, then that, or 5Filter to get that feed into Evernote. So from an Intel sharing perspective, this is pretty easy because I just create a new notebook and I share it out with who my partners are. And whenever we have stuff we want to share, I just create a new note and I write about it. Right? Pretty simple. You could probably have some sort of through the use of that, you could maybe come up with some templates or standard tags that you want to use so that you can make that useful. And then the other use that I talked about was case tracking. So you create this Evernote notebook, and one note is a case that you're working on. Like I said, you can establish a template for that. And then tags, you would just set them up as open, working, closed as an example. So then I could create a save search, like give me all the cases that are open that are assigned to me, and you can just click that and then see all the cases that you need to work on. So this is a very beta version of a tagging structure for doing these things, and this is the framework that I was previously talking about. So I have the three purposes here: the case tracking, Intel sharing, and then OSINT DB. And I broke it down using the secret weapon tags like the who, what, when, where. So the when, I'm interpreting that as it's either like a priority or maybe like in this case for case tracking, it could be the priority. But for Intel sharing, that could be maybe the confidence associated with that data, and the same thing with the OSINT. Depending on the source, you could by default assign it like high confidence, medium confidence, low confidence. For the what, these are basically, this is a reference number, and what this allows you to do is easily go amongst these things. So what I can do is I can look at, for every case, show me the data from the Intel sharing group and the data from OSINT that maybe I used when investigating that case. From an Intel sharing perspective, you can start with a piece of data here and then pivot off to the cases associated with that and the OSINT that started it. And the same thing with the OSINT. You can see the cases that have been associated with a particular bit of data. So there's some good use there. So then there's the where column is the workflow or state. So I already talked about the case tracking. So here I just use the example inbox, working or closed. For Intel sharing, I wanted to come up with slightly different names. So there's something that's new, that's maybe never been looked at, and then maybe people, as they look at it, they could tag it as, hey, this is relevant or not relevant, and you can come up with your own structure there. And then for the open source int, new or its default state. But then if somebody used it in one of their cases, maybe they could tag it to be useful or useless, and you can look at some of the other options there too. And then with the who, with the case tracking, that could be who worked on it, whether they opened it or assigned it, whatever. So you can see who worked on a particular case. And in the note, you could come up with a structure where whenever you update it, you always put like the date and your name, so that you can see like what each person did. For Intel sharing, like I showed this, you could look at the source that it's coming from. So whether it's like the DIB or the FSI stack in this case. And then for the OSINT DB, you could basically document who it came from. So in this case, I just gave examples of NIST and abuse.ch. But the one point that I don't want to make is, like, you don't have to tag, like, don't tag it if it's not relevant, right? A lot of these cases, like a lot of cases, especially with the data that's automatically fed into the system, it'll have some default tags, but you don't need to go back and like retroactively tag stuff appropriately. You have it, and you can search for it, and you can find stuff. And only if it's relevant to a case that you're working on, or if it's a good piece of intel that somebody shared, or a good piece of OSINT, then you would tag it. So you don't have this problem of being able to like it isn't a very strict tagging structure. You only tag it when it's relevant. And then like I said, these are these identifiers that you can use to cross-reference between these notebooks or tables. The other thing that you can do too is Evernote has, you could create meta notes, which is a note that maybe you want to pull several notes together. So you can create one note and then create links off to all the other notes that are associated together. You can do one-off other tags. So say you're doing an investigation and you want a way to easily pull together all the relevant data that you're looking for. Like you could just temporarily create some temp tags to go in so that you could just and then save that off as a search, and then you could click that to always get back to the same set of data that you're working for. And then, like I said initially, there's alternate tagging structures. So these would be other notebooks that you could create for maybe you want to create a table of adversaries. And the cool thing about that is now I can look at the adversary, and I can, using the cross-references, I can see maybe all the cases associated with them, maybe OSINT associated with them. You could look at their attack campaigns. So you use the cross-reference structure to really pull all this data together. So some of the other different tables that you might want to create are ones for adversaries, campaign, waves, or individual attack, or maybe you'll have an indicator database. So that's kind of neat, because what you can do is you can look at an indicator, and then you could cross-reference that with, all right, what adversaries use that indicator, or what cases are associated with that indicator database. So there's some really cool things that you can do there. And like I said, to simplify it all, you can use those saved searches. So, so this is basically talking about the search. So you can search based on tags. There's just your standard searching, so you can just put a text string in, like you put IP address in, domain, and you can find out like all the data that you've collected associated with that. You can do advanced search, so you can merge, you can specify a notebook, a set of tags, the terms, and you can even put dates in there. Like I only want to see notebooks that were created during this date range. And by default, they and these all together. They don't have an or, so this is one downside. Currently, there's no or capability in doing advanced searches. And so this is just an example where I could search for an IP. Maybe I find a note that was from an open source Intel resource. And then I would learn something there, then maybe a time frame of when that IP was added to this blacklist. So then I could run a secondary search around that timeline to see what else was going on during that time. I can, like the example that I gave previously, where I can get situational awareness because I have all these blog feeds, so I know what is going on then and what was going on before and what was going on after. And then, like I said, using the save searches makes it very easy. Now, the big point here is most large organizations are not going to let you do all this, except for maybe the OSINT portion in Evernote, because they don't control the data. And so the whole goal of this experiment was to create something in Evernote, quick and dirty, and use those lessons learned to build a framework that you could use in other sources. So you could use other log management solutions like open source stuff like Graylog, Logstash, or you can go full on and do Splunk. You could use some of your different SIM technologies. And there's some other things that you can do. You could use a wiki. You could use WordPress just in a different way. SharePoint, obviously. I mean, and you can even just create like Windows structure. So you could use like a shared drive and just create a note, which would be like a Word document or a Notepad document associated with this. So it's by coming up with the structure, you basically have this very flexible solution. But the most important part is whatever you choose to do, like on the far right there, you have the data and you need to tag it, and it has to be searchable, and it basically throwing everything into one big bucket. Just some future work. Just trying to get more feeds in, doing some additional scripting, finding out a way to get some of the vendor APT reports in, adding new news blogs so you can keep situational awareness of what's going on, integrating SIF like I talked about, and improving and formalizing the tag structure. There are definitely deficiencies that I see that I'm not happy with, and so I'm trying to come up with the best way, because I don't want, as an example, to create a new tag for every case that I open, because you have this infinite number of tags that you would be creating. And so I'm trying to come up with a solution that simplifies that so that you reduce the number of tags that you would have to manage. Do some using Evernote API so that you can do auto tagging. So you can, using the API, search into all the notes that have IP addresses and auto tag them with that IP. So you can do some cool stuff like that. And maybe eventually Evernote as a SIM, you know? So instead of going out and buying that huge complex thing, coming up with some sort of structure that you could do that. But in summary, there are lots of point solutions for solving some of the different problems that I talked about, but none of them bring them together in one place where you can use that data. So as I said, start with something simple, quick and dirty, and the example that I gave here was with Evernote. But the goal is, in the end, to determine what your real requirements are to understand the real problem that you're facing. And a lot of times, maybe that solution is fine as it is. But worst case scenario, you identify the gaps that you have, and you can either build in-house or maybe bring in and configure a commercial solution, like from a threat intel provider to solve that problem. So yeah, this is, I'm Grecs on Twitter, novainfosec.com, and there's a Twitter feed associated with that. And if you want to contact me, it's just NISP contact with a bit.ly link. So NISP, Nova InfoSec Portal. And if you want to write this down, it's just like to contact me, it's just Grecs at novainfosec.com if you want to contact me. And I'm going to get off the stage now, so the next person can get ready, and I will take questions in the back. Okay? Thank you.